Welcome to the Nectar podcast, discussing the things we think about Hull City AFC.
Nectar podcast, which you can download the audio version of from your favourite podcast supplier, and of course right now we are streaming live on Periscope, and immediately after we've finished it will also be available in vision on the Amber Nectar YouTube page. More details on our Twitter account of all those addresses and so on. As you can see, Les has rejoined us after hiding in the spare room last week, although if there was ever a week where you wanted to hide, it would be a week like this after two different but nonetheless still shocking defeats, especially when you pack the two of them together and look at the opportunities lost, the points lost, and the general malaise that seems to have afflicted everybody involved with the club. I want to go backwards though, because there's far more to talk about in the context of the Reading game at the weekend than there is about the Wigan game last Tuesday, although we will touch on the Wigan game. One of you two guys, because it certainly wasn't me, sent a prescient tweet saying it was going to be typical City for Reading to win their first home game of the season after 4 straight losses against us, and lo and behold, Andy.
Yeah, we saw that coming in, a team without a single point at home. You would absolutely pray to the footballing gods to have Hull City at home, wouldn't you, as a means of getting rid of that? And were we accommodating?
It was a very astute tweet to send, but I mean, the first thing I want to say is that by calling it typical City, it can kind of let you off, let the club off a little bit, or certainly let the team and the manager off by just sort of putting this 2-word soundbite in that we're used to using for so many different reasons over the years. City were absolutely terrible and deserved the brickbats.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It sort of implies that the universe conspired against City, or there's some giant hand of fate, rather than the more obvious truth that City are shit. And we've got a manager that doesn't appear to know what he's doing match day to match day, whether we win that game, whether we lose that game. You know, there's the choices for the next game are going to slightly baffle you, and you're not going to quite see what the decision making was. And then you've got the evident truth that throughout a couple of seasons of letting decent players go and bringing in rubbish ones, that we just really don't have much. So even if we did have a sparklingly inspiring manager, which we clearly don't have, we're not going to get a great deal anyway, because we've assembled a squad that looks as if mid-table is utterly beyond it, let alone, you know, anything.
Can you forgive players who aren't up to the job for demonstrably being not up to the job, providing they put the effort in? Because we've always talked in the past about effort not being praiseworthy, because, you know, we could all make the effort if we pulled on a City shirt. But at the same time, when effort isn't present, which certainly has been aimed at, if not all, certainly the majority of those who turned out for City at Reading at the weekend, then that becomes, well, the rest of it is forgivable, but a lack of effort isn't.
Yeah, exactly right. And look, we know this team isn't good enough. We know that we're in a grim battle for 21st. That represents the summit of our ambition, as far as I can tell. And this side isn't good enough for anything beyond that. But for crying out loud, we don't look anywhere near getting 21st at the moment, the way we're playing. And so, look, it's forgivable to lose, and it's forgivable to not be as good at football as the other team that you're playing, and that's going to happen most weeks, no matter what. What I can't forgive is the capitulation, the gutless, cowardly surrender that we saw on Saturday. It was absolutely pathetic. It spoke of a significant deficit in moral fibre, quite frankly, throughout the entire side. No one really escapes from it, apart from maybe Marshall, who can't do anything about the shower of shit in front of him. He's just got to put up with it and do the best he can, and he's probably done the best he can, certainly in the last half dozen games. But other than that, they look completely disinterested. They're an incoherent shower at the moment, and you can blame the manager for that, because he's got to try and motivate them. But ultimately, they're the ones who go out and play. And to lose in that fashion to a side like Reading, who aren't much good either, to cough up a 3-0 win, I'm still really angry about it, because it's completely unforgivable.
You said that it's a battle for 21st. Of course, if the season ended now, which we'd quite like it to, we'd have won that battle, because that's where we are. It's actually quite astonishing, given how appalling we've been in the last 7 days, that we're not in the bottom 3, although that could change dramatically this weekend because we've got to play Middlesbrough, who are second, and I think they only drew at the weekend, didn't they? But they're still obviously going great guns. I mean, they should be top because Leeds got beat by Birmingham at the weekend, and of course we play Leeds afterwards, and then we've got Sheffield United, who, as we speak today, are in fourth. So 3 of the current top 4, even if they're not necessarily 3 of the current top 4 by the time each fixture comes round, are next in line for City, and you just feel like it's going to be sort of like a walking the plank a little bit each time.
Oh, it's quite terrifying. What are Middlesbrough going to do to us? I think they're going to spoon out our eyeballs and put their phallus in the socket. I think they're going to do sordid, nasty things to us. And by that point, we're going to be a quarter of the way into the season, and avoiding relegation is the best hope we've got. I mean, we're not that far now. I mean, how come we've been 9 games in and still be making the same mistakes in terms of set pieces? That's absolutely criminal. Set pieces should be the easiest things to put right if that's one of your big failings, because the path to goal when a team's doing from open play are infinite, so defending that becomes more difficult. But there's a lot more finity when it comes to defending a set piece. You know where the ball's coming from, you know where the players are lined up. You can choose to do those things better, but City apparently can't. And we have this thing where we allow free headers from corners, and even if Marshall saves it, we'll then dither about and allow the opponents to react first so that they can put the rebound in. It's just absolutely criminal. There was points against Reading where it looked like he was using a knackered video player, where City were playing in slow motion. The only thing is, Reading were playing at normal speed, and it's ridiculous, and nothing appears to change. We changed personnel. I think we changed personnel a little bit too much. Let's chuck Dicko in on against Wigan, but let's not have him anywhere near the team on Saturday. Let's drop Lehigh in this game and play it in the other. There doesn't really appear to be a great deal of rationale behind it, really.
Is it a case that Nigel Adkins really doesn't know his best team and doesn't know an awful lot of the players who might not necessarily have been that instrumental in bringing some of these individuals in, and therefore he's desperately sort of scrabbling around trying to find a formula that works, and therefore making all these changes when it clearly doesn't work each time?
Do you know what? I'd accept that a little bit more if he didn't appear to demotivate certain other players. We saw his motivational techniques last season when McDonald had a bad game and he basically slagged him off in the press, and then later said, "Oh, actually he was unwell." I mean, if that's how you sort of publicly motivate your players, then perhaps we should be more understanding when we see like a player like John Terrell, who I think is the most technically gifted player at the club, currently looks as if he doesn't love football anymore, and Dicko always puts the effort in, but the final application is gone, because let's face it, what supply do the strikers get? I mean, Campbell, he can't be enjoying this season, can he really? He's just, play up front on your own and we might occasionally pepper something at you. It's just abysmal, and it doesn't appear to be thought through, and for all of his happy clappy motivational crap, he's not motivating players. I bet Milinkovic is motivated right now, isn't he? I mean, he might as well just stay in bed on a Saturday, hadn't he? And you can choose certain players and say they've gone backwards under this manager, who's supposedly a motivator because of his positivity. It's meh.
Well, you struggle to find many players who have gone forward. The only one is Marshall, and that's because he's so bloody busy. He's got plenty of opportunity to hone his skills. Other than that,
well, I want to bring up Jarrod Bowen then at this point, because he was going forward, having scored in the last 2 games, and we'll touch on the Wigan game shortly, as we said. But then Nigel Adkins substitutes him on Saturday, while there's still this clear sort of yawning chasm of quality in the midfield caused by the lack of partnership that's existing between Stewart and Henriksen. The decision to substitute Bowen, irrespective of what stage of the game it was at and whether the figure that the game was won or lost by that stage, has been particularly sort of singled out, hasn't it? It's been the whole sort of abscess of a performance that City put in has kind of been tunnelled into this one decision to take off Jared Bowen when he was the only one who looked like scoring a goal because of his achievements in the last couple of games.
Well, it is a strange one, isn't it? Because, you know, he hadn't had a really good start to the season, and there was that question of have other teams found him out? Is he a bit of a one-trick pony? You know, that person, I think, is an unfair accusation to chuck at him. But he appears to have willed himself out of that early season torpor, didn't he? Just by basically putting his head down and trying to get stuff done.
By giving a toss.
And by, you know, wanting to succeed, even if it's only personally, even if it's not going to really do the team any good. So, you know, to sort of drag him off at the point where he's sort of finally turning his season around. I know it's only 9 games in, but it's still a considerable enough portion of the season, isn't it? So yeah, he finally willed himself into some good form and then finds himself turned off. But the problem with Adkins is you can't just look at these decisions in isolation, or the lack of decisions in isolation, can you? It's when you piece them all together and realise that we've got pieces of 25 jigsaws in the box rather than one coherent picture, even if it is of baked beans.
Wasn't a semblance of a plan, is there?
No.
So how are we trying to win games? What's the overriding philosophy? Are we a team that wants to pass it around? Are we a team that wants to go down the wings? Are we a team that wants to play a long ball? What the hell are we trying to do this season?
Can we remind ourselves that Evandro wasn't there, and I think that Nigel Adkins would quite like whatever squad he's got to build a side around him.
Yeah, but we can't be reliant on one player who's injured all the time, can we? I see your point. I know what you mean. He's robbed of probably one of his best players.
The most creative player in the squad, unquestionably. I mean, him and Jackson Irvine, I'd still, you know, there should be room when they're both fit for both of them to be in the starting 11.
Yeah, I would say so. But what's his backup plan? If he's not got Evandro, think of something else then. That's your bloody job.
But off the record, I'm sure that Nigel Adkins would say, I haven't got a backup plan because I haven't got enough players as a backup. And that's not necessarily his fault. I mean, we talk about this head of recruitment that he's almost like a mythical being. I mean, he certainly exists, but nobody knows what he looks like. He walks freely down the streets of Hull without getting the abuse that Nigel Adkins would probably get, and certainly Ehab Allen would get walking through the streets of Hull. And yet, as head of recruitment, where there has been patently either bad recruitment or zero recruitment, this guy has got to take some of the rap, but presumably he isn't.
But then Adkins has got a coach, and it comes back to what Les says about the fact that we don't look like a side that's been coached, especially at set pieces where we're enduringly terrible at them. And this is where Adkins has obviously got the excuse that the person in charge of recruitment is useless, but then again, he's probably got no support from the owners either.
It's a fair point to say that Adkins has been dealt a bad hand, but he's also setting fire to some of his remaining cards, isn't he? And that appears to be the big problem. That we know he hasn't got a great deal to work with, but let us see that you're working with it. You know, let's see that you're not demotivating players. It's just not good enough, is it? And we found ourselves wondering, can he be sacked? You know, we think maybe he can't be sacked, that the Allens won't, but perhaps we thought that about Slutsky. And his record is, you know, sub-Slutsky, I would say, because, you know, hell, at least with Slutsky, we lost a load of games, but we're frigging entertaining.
But, I mean, Slutsky ultimately only lasted 3 months. Nigel Adkins is pushing a year now. Slutsky went in December, didn't he? And we're nearly in October, so we've, you know, I can't remember how quickly Adkins was appointed after Slutsky left, even though Adkins was, of course, hovering around like a lingering fart before Slutsky had even been fired. But, you know, we're looking at 10 months pushing a year, so he's had a lot more time than Slutsky was ever given, hasn't he?
I just don't know what we'll do there. I mean,
that is the question. Is it because he's there and at least we've got somebody in, as opposed to... I mean, look, there are plenty of out-of-work managers who would still apply for the job just because they are desperate for work, and they would have to be to work for Hull City under the current regime, but maybe they're in a situation where I just need the money and therefore I'll go and do it. There's plenty of managers who would apply for the job if Adkins was relieved of his duties tomorrow.
You don't do it for the money though, you wouldn't do it because you think it might elevate your career.
It's certainly not going to take pride of place on your CV unless you happen to be the fortunate dude who's in charge on the day that the Allens sell to somebody else.
It's not a CV to take comfort in, is it?
Absolutely is not.
Clearly not. I mean, look at Brian Little's situation where he was working in a regime whereby there was so little money that the players were training on grass verges and playing fields where they lived and not being able to come because of a lack of money for petrol and all that. And then one day Adam Pearson walks through the door and suddenly Brian Little's got a load of money to spend. You know, if you are that manager in the club on the day that the Allams walk out. Maybe that's what Adkins is hoping for. He's hoping one day that the Allams, he will outlive the Allams at Hull City. You know, the last parachute payment in January, and then the Allams will lose even more interest than they're deeming to show at the moment, and he might still be in position on the day that the Allams hand over the key to somebody far more benevolent and far more caring.
Then I'd sack him.
And then you'd still get rid of him.
Well, yeah, if someone good comes in, then someone who's going to run the club properly.
But you think about what happened with Phil Brown. When Adam Pearson sold up to Russell Bartlett and Paul Duffin, Phil Brown had just saved us from relegation, but there was an awful lot, and I think all three of us were among them, saying, I'm not really sure that we want Phil Brown to be our manager, and with a new regime coming in, that was the opportunity for them to bring in their own man. But, to I think a lot of people's surprise, and because of what Phil Brown had managed to achieve through both inspiring a squad that had been inherited from Phil Parkinson that was at a low ebb, but also from the lack of ability of Leeds, Luton and Brighton that season, he managed to keep them up, and therefore he was deemed to be worth a chance.
Granted, but I'm less equivocal now than I was about Phil Brown. I don't want Nigel Adkins to be our manager or head coach anymore.
But if Nigel Adkins was given the tools that you would expect a manager in the Championship to be given, let's say he was given the sort of backing that Frank Lampard has been given at Frank Lampard's Derby County, then would he, ultimately, can a manager is a manager automatically a better manager because he's got more money and better players?
Well, no, the problem is he's not achieving par at the moment. And now that par is not particularly testing, it only requires City to be poor as opposed to actively terrible. But we're not even achieving that par at the moment, so we're underachieving with what we've got. So if we're doing that now, no, I wouldn't. It's all hypothetical, but no, I wouldn't hang around and keep him in this glorious new dawn that seems so very far away.
Hypothetical question for you, Matt. How do you think Frank Lampard's Derby County would fare if they were playing Jeff Lindsay yellow?
Good question. I wouldn't have a clue.
Oh, okay.
It always was Jeff Lynn's ELO.
Was it always?
Yeah. He's just not in that Jeff Lynn has always been in ELO. He changed the name because everybody else left, and so there was an egotism issue going on. I think. Yeah. So anyway, shine a little love on this podcast.
We do.
Right. Just before we move on to the Wigan game, I really do think it's time Nigel Adkins thought a bit more about what he did on Twitter as well. Did you see that tweet where I can't remember who the supporter was, but he sent a tweet to a supporter asking loads of questions before the Reading game about how their day was going to go. I haven't seen the follow-up stuff after the final whistle went, but asking what time will you set off? What route will you take to Reading? Who's going with you? What will you eat and drink? I mean, if you ask Andy that question, it would be beer, maybe a pie at half-time, and then more beer, irrespective of whether it was win, lose or draw.
Yeah. So he's asking people what planning they've put in place, isn't there?
It's almost like
because they're not going to see much when they get to Wigan or Reading.
It's almost like he's going to tell a friend of his who's a burglar when you're going to be out the house and exactly what time you're going to be back.
Burglars a team then.
But look, the
cat bagel from set pieces though.
The sort of Brent-esque Nigel Adkins persona, and it's not even a persona, you kind of believe it's the real person saying that rather than anybody trying to send himself up or anything like that. And it's really, I don't feel sorry for him, but at the same time I do kind of cringe for him when he does things like that.
I think I cringe at him rather than for him.
You guys have no empathy at all at the moment, do you?
Well, look at the bastard league table.
No, well, we are 21st, which is where you want us to be, Andy.
Okay, well, extrapolate forward. we're under a point a game. Where we are
and we're
now,
playing Middlesbrough, Leeds and Sheffield United next.
Precisely.
Yes.
So if we lose those next three games, and goodness knows how goal difference could turn into negative treble figures by that point, but we'll have 7 points from 12. So that's, a fraction of a half point a game. That will give us something in the early 30s of points, which means we'll be relegated.
Is there any
late March?
Does the it was always a motto or a soundbite. It's now got a hashtag as well in front of it. But does typical City also apply positively, whereby we'll probably beat either Leeds or Middlesbrough, having lost to Reading?
No.
What
do you think? No, I really honestly don't. I do wonder if there might be a little bit of a reaction against Middlesbrough, in as much as it might be close.
But we still lose. Yes.
All I can take solace in is Middlesbrough have only scored 4 times away from home this season, and there you go. That's my straw clutch. That's the most optimistic I can say. It could be a narrow defeat.
As for the Wigan game, Les, it wasn't much better. It was a more of a lax performance than out and out dreadful. And City did have moments where they shone and dominated the match, but again it was almost as if their eyes were off the ball for too long and for key periods of the game. And even after Jarrod Bowen pulled the goal back, you didn't go into the second half of the game thinking that City were necessarily going to, not only not going to equalise, but even if they did, were not necessarily going to either hang on for a point or go on, or certainly not go on to win it. You know, it always felt like it was just beyond City's reach.
Well, the belief that we might pull ourselves back in it needs you to think that we may be organised and are thinking things through. But that is the key thing that we're bemoaning, isn't it? The lack of organisation and the lack of planning, and even just like the coordinated attempt at defending. I mean, like their first goal, Morsey just sort of glided through the middle of the pitch before, you know, sort of thwacking it towards goal. It seems really simple stuff. Even, you know, I think Lehigh's been fairly decent so far this season, but you know,
you are possibly in the minority.
Well, maybe, but Windass just brushed past him, you know, for the second goal, didn't he, and left him for dead. It's all relative.
Yeah,
it's all relative because look what else we've had in the back four. You know, there's not a great deal of credit to go around. But I actually thought he was, of the defenders, maybe the most okayest.
I'd go along with that, but he was nowhere near the races at Wigan, was he?
No,
and neither was City. And the irritating thing is we actually had a good spell in that game. Not just an okay spell, but a genuinely good spell where we looked like things were going to happen. But we don't have the ability, do we, to capitalise on it? And you know that at some point the other team's going to take it to us because we're not capable of maintaining a high standard for 90 minutes. And what frightened me the most was when Wigan had their spell, just how bad we looked. I mean, we looked like an absolute pub team, didn't we? And I get that Wigan are a good team, they're fifth. They were obviously that high.
They were 11th. They were 11th before they played us. But you know, it's tight as anything. Somebody's pointed out that City are actually only still 11 points off the top of the table. Not that that's ever going to be made up. But the only reason for that, it doesn't sound like a lot, and it isn't. But it's only because everybody's only played 9 games.
Well, it's a point
not a quarter of the way
we'll
through
be
yet.
Knocking on 50 off the top by the end of the season, won't we? Which I'd probably take at the moment. But it just frightened me on how bad we were, and it should have been 3 or 4 to Wigan at half time. It's not one of these exaggerated things where you would take the worst case scenario that could have happened. It really should have been a lot nil that half. But then we got ourselves back in it and made nothing of it.
Which is typical City.
Well, it is,
especially away from home.
It is at the moment. Wigan should have been thinking, oh crap, you know, we might have asked this up. They'll have been expecting us to really come out at them at the start of the second half and try and get these games sorted out. But it was so ponderous and so slow and so feeble, and it's as though, again, we didn't have a plan of quite what we were going to do, and that lack of idea. I don't know what Adkins said to them at half time. I can only assume it wasn't just be terrible for a bit, and that'll really get us back into this. But we were so.
I think he was too busy Instagramming a picture of some bagels with strawberries on or something.
Would that actually be bad if he did that instead of tactics and left the players to their own
Well,
devices?
all right, we're back on the subject of Adkins again. A couple of people have messaged us on Periscope saying that Adkins is waiting to be sacked, and another one saying that Adkins knows he's a dead man walking. I mean, do either of you hold on to that thought, or do you think that Adkins is actually blissfully unaware of just how much of a predicament he's in? The world's most positive man doesn't do negativity, even when he's got a bloody good reason to be negative.
He doesn't have to do negativity to have some kind of self-awareness. Anybody with a bit of self-awareness would have known taking this job, even just after Slutsky had been sacked, that you're a dead man walking from day one under the regime we're currently under the way things are operating. We'll pretend that we want out when really we're just doing whatever we can to bleed the club a little bit more. No, and I'll say it once again, I don't have any empathy for it. If he's realised it now, I think really he should have realised it when he first came. As you said, it's CV kryptonite, isn't it? Coming to Hull City, it's not a clever idea. I'm sick of City.
Did you read the interview with David Mailer in the Hull Daily Mail?
Yeah,
this week. It was what
upsetting, wasn't it?
It was upsetting. It was also the most candid interview anybody associated with the Allens who've since exited the club, I think, has ever given. Maybe one or two of them in the past have, like Steve Bruce, for example, have signed those confidentiality clauses in order to get their payoffs. Of course, Mailer wasn't due a payoff because his contract ran out, so he can say what he likes, and he has.
Yeah, and it was still all couched in the kind of code that people use in football, wasn't it? That, oh, it's sad to see what's happening to Hull City, which basically means, God, the Allens are fucking this up, aren't they?
Yeah.
And,
you want somebody. I mean, you feel somebody a personality as strong and as admirable as David Mailer's. I mean, let's not forget, for all the stick he got unfairly from some City fans, he spent nearly 7 years with us. We don't do players who have that sort of longevity, certainly not now. And he saw so much. He saw a promotion, he saw an FA Cup final, he saw Europe, he saw a relegation and another promotion and another playoff victory. He's seen everything that we've achieved in the Allen era, if you like, because obviously the first couple of years of the Allens didn't have any achievements because we were still sort of rebuilding ourselves. So when he speaks, especially as he's always been a sort of a jovial and very self-aware sort of character, and very good at the sort of the social side of things, when he speaks, you need to listen, don't you? Because he, especially in the situation that he's in, whereby it's not going to cost him any money, assuming he doesn't libel anybody, it's not going to cost him any money to speak his mind because he hasn't had to sign a confidentiality clause of any description.
But Andy was right when he said, there's a sort of coded way of saying things in football, because although it's the world game, football is a small business. There's a small percentage of people playing professional football. So you're always going to be careful who you piss off, because you never know who's going to be your teammate next year, who's going to be your manager next year, who's going to be your chairman next year. So you tend not to make, bridge-burning, wide-sweeping statements. But, the fact that he's felt able to come out and say that stuff and it not even get picked up and be thought of as inflammatory or controversial, because it isn't, is it? All he's done is just said what we all really suspected was the thinking behind his leaving and behind the way that players felt during the last couple of years. Nothing about it felt controversial.
He's also not been afraid to name other players who felt the same. He mentioned Michael Dawson, he mentioned Abel Hernandez, he mentioned Moses Odebajo. And it's also interesting because one thing we did say a lot last season was that Mailer and Adkins didn't seem to get on, but he's absolutely resolutely defended his relationship with Nigel Adkins, saying it was pretty much fine. And the problem, although he didn't say it as explicitly as I'm about to, the problem was in the boardroom. The problem was higher up.
Yeah, but I think he's defended his relationship with Alan Pardew as well.
Yeah. Oh, God, that takes us back.
He made him his manager on FIFA.
Well, if you haven't read the interview that Phil Buckingham did with David Mailer, it's on the Hull Daily Mail website. If you can get past all the adverts and the pop-ups, it's a right riveting read.
Isn't it a shame? Because if we were a properly run football club, you'd think that David Mailer would have been our player. He could have retired here. He could have gone into coaching here. It could be one of those.
He was our next Andy Dawson. He was the next 10-year servant, wasn't he? Who could have ended up with a testimonial, and it didn't happen. And he didn't play for Reading on Saturday. He's injured at the moment, but
he's got a double hat-trick,
almost certainly. But you remember what it was like, even when we went to Burton at the end of last season, when we kind of knew that things were probably going to work out okay in the end, in terms of not being relegated at least, but not necessarily anything else. And, when he put that penalty away and just led all the celebrations when every one of those goals went in when we were facing them coming towards us on that terrace. And that was just David Mailer all over, wasn't it? Sort of a leader of men. He wasn't necessarily natural captaincy material when he first walked through the door. He wasn't going to be. We had Curtis Davis, for example. But, he was still a natural leader, or certainly a leader who made himself into a leader. As he aged, as he got more experienced, and as the average age of the squad got younger around him, and it just sort of culminated in that night at Burton, where he was in his element. He knew he was on his way, and this was his last sort of great night for the City fans, really, wasn't it?
They gave a shit all the way through, didn't they? For 7 years.
And it would be quite nice if every player followed at least that example, irrespective of what so-called shortcomings they might have as footballers.
Well, you can see Kevin Stewart's modelling his game online, can't you?
Okay. It's the Amber Nectar podcast, and 10 years ago, this happened. So you've just heard commentary of Michael Turner's goal for Hull City against Everton 10 years ago, blimey, in a game that ended in a 2-2 draw. We haven't got the other City goal because it was an OG by Phil Neville, followed by two of the most famous goals ever scored by Hull City footballers, the strikes by Giovanni and the header from Daniel Kuzan that won us the game at Arsenal the following week. Both of these games were within the sort of the 7-day boundary that we have for our 10th anniversary look back at the first Premier League season that Hull City ever played. And by the end of it, if you look at the league table for the end of December, 30th of December, by the time all that weekend's fixtures had been played, all the 2 weekends, because one was a Sunday and the next one was a following Saturday, City had played 6 and were in 6th, behind Chelsea, Liverpool, Villa, Arsenal and West Ham. 3 wins, 2 draws, just the 1 defeat. A goal difference of -2, despite all those wins and the few games played. It was because we got an absolute hammering by Wigan, of course. 11 points from an available 18. I remember us being in dreamland because we beat Fulham on the opening day and thought this is probably going to be as good as it gets, but at least we've won our first Premier League game. Now, we can talk about how we felt after Arsenal because we're never ever going to have that kind of feeling again, I don't think, certainly not for a long time. But let's talk first of all about the Everton game because chronologically it came first, and that was a serious test. They all are, obviously, at that level because we were in new territory with every game we played. But Everton are mainstays, no slouches, seriously good squad, if not necessarily a squad challenging for Champions League football every season. And when we went 2-0 up early in the second half, again, I go back to our mate Joe Atkinson, who came out of the game at Blackburn and just shouted really loudly, "Oh, this is easy." And that's where we were again, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we was only 6 games into the season at this point, but we really quickly learned to retrain our sights on what was achievable. I mean, we left the ground after the Everton game feeling disappointed against only getting a score draw against a team that had finished in the Europa League place the previous season. And in fact, they'd only played in Europe a couple of days before this game, hadn't they? Because that's why it was on the Sunday. You know, we left disappointed. That we'd not maintained a 2-goal lead. Granted, there were points where we were babbing ourselves thinking we might entirely chuck it away. Mm-hmm. But that's we'd sort of had that chastening bit of against Wigan where we thought maybe we need to be careful about what we wish for. But then City just picked it up again, didn't they? You know, beat Newcastle, drew against Everton, and then we had later things to come. I'd forgotten that I'd written the match report for the Everton game, and I'm quite proud of this line. I'd said, the choice of a Brazilian or a Gabonese might sound like a hirsute woman's waxing options. I was, of course, talking about whether it was Daniel Kuzan made his debut to partner Marlon King or whether Giovanni played, and Kuzan got the nod. Yeah,
Giovanni, for the second game in a row, was on the bench and didn't come on. He didn't come on against Newcastle the previous week, which, of course, we managed to win without him. City took the lead. Michael Turner, just before the 20th minute mark, the sort of goal Turner scored a lot, heading in directly from a set piece. Phil Neville spanned an own goal early in the second half. But I remember, Cahill pulled one back with 15 minutes to go for Everton. And then I think Leon Osman's goal went in off the crossbar, and there was a little bit of a delay as to whether they were... It was pre-goal line technology, and I think there was a delay before the officials decided that the ball had crossed the line. The moment that happened, I remember us three stood together in E5, looking at each other and thinking, we're now going to lose this. There was 12 minutes to go. Everton had their tails up, and of course, this is Everton, and we're Hull City. We've never been in this position before at this level. This is all new territory for us, and they will have been through this 1,000 times against clubs who were not used to it, who come up from the Championship, arse about for a year or two, and then end up back where they belong. And so... yeah, you're right. We babbed ourselves for the last 10 minutes because we were terrified we were going to lose from a 2-0 position, and that would have hurt and probably had a very big knock-on effect.
Yeah, I like to think we would have got over it because we were still very much on the crest of a wave. If that would have been a knock, I think we'd have been generally okay. But Boateng came on, shawled us up for the last 10 minutes in a way that he was so very good at doing. And I think once you got over the initial disappointment of letting a 2-goal lead slip, which is always a pretty rotten thing to happen, it was still a 2-2 draw at home to Everton, wasn't it? It was an entertaining game. We had absolutely contributed our part to that. We scored a couple of goals. It was still pretty terrific, in all honesty. Set aside, of course, it's better to come from 2 down than to let a 2-goal lead slip, but Either way you look at it, we shared 4 goals with a real proper established Premier League club, and got another point, and we were still at a point where you were desperately clinging on to getting as many points as you could. We didn't realise that there was going to be an even more dramatic burst of form to follow it, but this was another good point. We'd taken 2-2 before the game, and I was happy with it afterwards.
It was our first game against Everton for nearly 45 years, and it was a lot longer than that since we'd last played them as equals in the league. We played them in the FA Cup when they were league champions in 1964. Before that, I think you go back to the 1950s when Everton were last not in the top flight, hence why we never got to play them. It was Kamil Zayati's home debut, it was Daniel Kuzan's home debut. I noticed we're 2-0 up with 20 minutes to go, and Kuzan goes off, and Phil Brown replaces him with Caleb Folan. So even when, some managers, mentioning no Adkins, would probably manage to want to shore things up, and Steve Bruce certainly would have taken off a striker and put on a defender if he was 2-0 up against Everton with 20 minutes to go, or certainly put on a more defensive-minded player. But no, off went Kuzan, and on came Caleb Folan, and it was like for like, and then they scored, made it 2-1, and even then, when Bernard Mendy went off, who'd been playing on the right wing that day, he was a like for like replacement with Richard Garcia. Phil Brown wanted to take these games to our opponents as much as possible, even when we'd squandered a 2-goal lead and got back to 2-2, and then finally, as you say, Les, Marlon King went off and George Boateng came on just to try and preserve that point. It was an interesting occasion. You look at some of those players in the Everton side. Fellaini was playing. He joined actually after the first of those European games, because he was a Liège player, wasn't he? And Moyes liked him and bought him pretty much straight away. Phil Neville was playing. Leon Osman, he scored the goal, the equalising goal. They had Tim Howard in goal. They're proper footballers, aren't they?
Arteta was a good player, wasn't he? I always enjoyed watching him.
And then Louis Sahar and James Vaughan. James Vaughan came off the bench. Remember we went to Huddersfield on Bubble Day and ended up watching it in the pub? Vaughan committed a really bad foul, I think on George Boyd, and our mate Rich Cundil just shouted Everton failure very loudly at the television for the rest of the game. Then we get to the Arsenal game the following Saturday, which was a tea-time kick-off. It was on Setanta.
When that was a thing.
Yeah, and it was the day when I was compared to Chesney Hawks, which I will always be grateful for.
Yeah,
so thank you
was
for that.
Quite different then, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a bit of a trim recently, but yes, I had a slightly floppy blonde hair. It was Arsenal fans who. It's not the first time I'd been compared to Chesney Hawks, but it was the first time I'd been compared to Chesney Hawks by Arsenal fans in the 12 Pins pub in front of all my Hull City supporting mates, and they've basically, and quite rightly too, never let me forget it. I am the one and only Chesney Hawks lookalike. So.
Do you remember when they was trying to claim that we'd only come to watch Ibua?
Yeah, they were singing that at us in the 12 Pins for ages, weren't they? You've only come to see Ibua, I won't mind, but no Arsenal fan ever went to Arsenal to watch Ibua because they all bloody hated him.
Well, he got subbed off, didn't he?
He did, yeah.
So we didn't even get our wish for the.
We'd just gone 2-1 up. I, as much as I love the memories I do have of that game, as usual, a bit like when we won at Wembley in 2008, most of my memories have got nothing to do with football. However, I don't remember anything about the first half at all, but I do remember when that really scruffy Arsenal goal that ended up going off Paul McShane's shin went in. Again, I think we all just looked at each other and just assumed we were now going to lose 3 or 4-0, which incidentally is pretty much what happened with every subsequent visit to Arsenal, certainly in the league. But what a comeback!
And also, first look at the Emirates Stadium, which is one of those where it's architecturally impressive, but sonically, just awful, isn't it? And that's to do with the people that fill it.
Comfy chairs.
Yeah, maybe, but there was just something about Arsenal's move from Highbury to the Emirates where that's where they seem to acquire their sense of entitlement. Where they should be having a prolonged duration of a manager who's given him quite a lot of success recently. That's more in the more recent past, but yeah, I think one of the reasons why we particularly couldn't really figure out what was going to do, and we were very low down, where we were practically tapping Dean Manny on the shoulder when he was taking a corner. But yeah, there was some fun to be had in that game, wasn't there?
We all dislike Arsenal to quite large degrees. My dislike of them was pretty much the same as anybody else's until we got into the stadium about 5 minutes before kick-off and the teams had just come out and the Arsenal announcer was announcing them and was doing that thing whereby he announced the first name of the player and the crowd shouted out the surname. and I've hated Arsenal with a passion ever since.
Do you know what I hate more than Arsenal? My ex who made me miss it.
I wondered how long it'd take. We are 39 and a half minutes into the podcast, and here we go. Carry on.
I just
Daniel Kuzan scored the winner. Les missed it because he was going out with
it.
an absolute,
Yeah,
what do you call her at the time, a wretch.
Yeah,
That was it.
Yeah, anyway. So we better just talk about Giovanni's goal instead, don't we?
Well, the thing is, I mean, we knew that he was going to have a shot, but I don't think because it was Arsenal away that Arsenal knew he would do it, because nobody would have the audacity to try and score against Arsenal, even though they had Almunia in goal, who was terrible, and that he would have the audacity to get it on target and put it in the net. We knew all of those things could happen, but I don't think any of us believed it would happen until the net actually bulged, and it's one of the most mental celebrations we've ever undergone, and we still could have gone on to lose the game 4-1 afterwards.
If you were nitpicking, which I'm sure Arsenal fans did because they're that kind of human beings, but if you were to really try to downplay the magnificence of something done to you, you might ask why Giovanni was allowed to shoot. But then again, it's 35 yards out on the wing.
And they didn't have a clue who he was.
Well, they do now.
Yeah, they did straight afterwards, yeah. And it was called the goal of the season on Match of the Day that night, even though it was only September. It annoys me whenever you see the Sky Sports retrospective of 08-09, because Setanta supplied the pictures that night, they never include that goal.
Right.
And it really annoys me that they never include that goal.
I've seen it once or twice.
The best
since.
goal that they've got rights for of the season.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a thing now.
Yeah, because Rich Garden did the fan zone thing for Setanta that night, didn't he? And he wore the tiger skin shirt. So I think that's right.
Fan zone. Is another thing. Is that still a thing? Does it still exist?
No idea. I remember because Myhill made a brilliant save from Fabregas in the second half, as I recall. After Kuzan had headed in Dawson's corner, what was it? Only about 4 minutes after Giovanni's goal to make it 2-1. We still had 30 minutes of defending to do because. I don't recall us, maybe it's just from the edited highlights that we got, but I don't recall us having another amazing chance to make it 3-1 at any point. We did defend extremely well, and this is one occasion where Phil Brown did decide, this is probably a lead worth preserving. So, I mean, he took Giovanni off, he took Boateng off, he took Kuzan off, he brought on Brian Hughes, he also brought on Garcia and Mendy and basically filled the midfield and just had Marlon King doing his sort of heroic run around and call people horrible names shtick up front. But yeah, I mean, there was one amazing save by Myhill from a Fabregas shot that I remember.
Do you remember what you thought when you were in the pub beforehand and you learned that Phil Brown was going 4-3-3 against Arsenal, who would have gone top if they did what everyone thought and won?
Yeah, I think we just sort of chortled at the impudence of it, didn't we? Just sort of, that's fun.
Yeah, it was gutsy.
I love Ian Ashby's post-match interview where he said if anybody had said that we would have got promoted to the Premier League and ended up winning Arsenal, I'd have thought they would be a bit mental. What a lovely turn of phrase that was to have in an after-match interview. And it was a live interview. I mean, it was on Match of the Day, but it was the Premier League do the interviews, don't they? And they give them out to all the different sources at the same time. So there's Ashby, is still in his kit, sweating, having played a blinder in the middle of the park, and then that's the phrase he came out with.
Do you know what we haven't discussed? We haven't discussed Andy Dawson's amazingly precise challenge on Theo Walcott. How awesome was that?
Well, that's kind of Dawson's defining moment of 10 years at Hull City. For all the consistency and the great free kicks, it's the tackle on Theo Walcott because, he had absolutely no right to catch this player who was, 12 years younger than him and 12 times faster, but somehow he did it. And it was the sort of crisp, clean left back on right wing and tackle that Arsenal fans certainly would have appreciated when Nigel Winterburn was playing for them. It was absolutely divine, wasn't
it? Do you think Dawson was stealing himself for a red card? Thinking, well, let's just leg him up while he's out the area.
Oh, hang on, I seem to have got the ball. Oh, everybody's applauding me.
Yeah.
Oh, look, there's Theo Walcott on the floor and I haven't actually touched him.
No, don't take it away from him. It was a beautiful moment and he meant every nanosecond.
One of the great things about the fact that the second goal followed the first one so quickly is that you'd just not really recovered from the first one yet. So your heart rate was still coming back under 300 beats a minute, and you'd just about stopped making a weird sort of ululation of joy.
No, I hadn't. I was raging at that point.
Well, you were. I was quite happy. So we'll just have to have had different perspectives on it. But you were still pumped from the first goal because it came so quickly afterwards, and it's one of those where you don't know if you've actually got another explosion of joy in you. Of course, it turns out a near post flick, and both goals went so perfectly into the top corner, didn't they? There's nothing that Arsenal could have done about either of them, really. Could have won the header, I suppose, with the corner, but once it happened, it was in. The same as the shot. Brilliant that they were both down at our end, so we could get a nice view of them.
There was wonderful as well when the final whistle went, and the City players spent ages over with the City supporters celebrating. This is what I'm told because I was working that night and I had to rush like buggery to get back to the Arsenal tube station and get up to Cockfosters where my car was.
Did you miss Bernard Mendy's dancing?
I did. I missed all of it. As soon as the final whistle went, I was out the door. What I did notice, though, was probably the only Hull City fan amongst all the Arsenal fans going out the stadium and queuing up for the tube was, there was a handful of others, obviously, and it was deathly silent. There were nobody complaining from the Arsenal side, which is unusual for Arsenal fans, let's be honest. But also...
Arsenal fan TV wasn't a thing at that point, though, was it?
But also, I'm assuming you guys felt the same when you later left the stadium, that although there's obviously lots of explosions of joy, there would have been a lot of people who were just open-mouthed with the sheer impudence and aghastness of it all.
Yeah, there was sort of like a muted joyfulness, wasn't there, where, we're massively happy inside, but not like giving it large.
We had no idea how to react.
And I just remember being at a tube station and somebody said, "What was the score?" And I said, 2-1 to Hull City. And he went, "No, it wasn't." All right then.
Before the game, City were 20-1 to win that game, and just before kick-off, they actually went all the way up to 33-1, which I think was because City were playing 3 out of their 10 outfielders as attackers rather than the expected 9-1-0 formation that would have made a lot of sense, and that John McGovern deployed so effectively at Peterborough that one time. But City were also 600-1 to win just after
Paul McShane's own goal.
Paul McShane's own goal, yeah, 600-1.
Did you?
No.
Was there any mobile betting at that point? It wasn't really a thing, was it?
The one everyone I travelled down with had gone and put £5 on City at the bookies just around the corner from the pub before the match. And I am thinking I was ever so clever. I thought, "Oh, mate, I was just going to set a fucking father on fire, you idiots." So that worked out well, didn't it?
I remember being on the Arsenal, the tube at Arsenal station, getting on the tube and squeezing on, and I remember a couple of very strong North London accents doing the Millwall thing where they don't pronounce their L's properly, going, "How the fuck did we lose to Hull City?" And I remember, because I had no colours on, I had no colours on, so you couldn't identify me as a fan of either club. And I remember an Arsenal fan deciding he was going to strike up a conversation with me, assuming I was an Arsenal fan as well. So I just let him talk and talk and talk, and I just said, "I'm a Hull City fan." And at the end of it, he went, "Oh, well, it was all right for you then, I suppose." Which was a very nice way to end our conversation and indeed our journey, because the tube pulled into